Welcome back, everybody. More now with Karl Rove. You know, another thing not getting that much attention in the press is this dust-up over whether President Obama bowed when he met the King of Saudi Arabia. And we've got the videotape of it, you know, that shows clearly there was something that amounted to at least a stoop. But interestingly now, Karl, the White House has come out and denied this, saying explicitly it was not a bow, saying he grasped the king's hand with two hands and he's taller. And that was their explanation for what we saw there.
Well, it reminds me of the politician who was caught in bed with somebody other than his wife, by his wife, and he told his wife, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? I mean, who do they think they're kidding? I mean, this is a bow to the waist. I mean, for them to say that he was holding both of the king's hands and bowing and lowering his head because the king is shorter to him, he'd have to be talking to Tattoo from Fantasy Island. I mean, the king is only a couple inches shorter than he is. Look, they ought to admit, the president bowed. He shouldn't have bowed. It was a breach of protocol. But it diminishes them for them to try and say to the American people, don't believe what you see on the camera. I mean,
how does
the
that
president,
happen, Karl? Because, you know, they didn't come out explicitly and do it. It was like an unnamed White House source that came out and said it wasn't a bow, it wasn't a bow.
Well, that says a lot. Would you like to be the White House spokesman on camera saying, no, that's not a bow? I mean, there's a reason why it is an unnamed White House spokesman is saying, offering the excuse, because nobody is willing to go on camera and look at him in the eye and say, oh, yeah, you're misunderstanding. That's not a bow. I mean, it's a bow, please. Maybe it was unintentional. Maybe it was unscripted. But don't ask us to expect it wasn't a bow.
Isn't there somebody in the White House advising him on protocol? You know, this is what you do when you meet the king. Don't bow. U.S. presidents don't bow.
I would suspect so. I'm not certain somebody was so emphatic beforehand. They might have assumed after he met the Queen of England that the lesson was good enough. And look, I would readily look. These are big conferences. You're in a different time zone. You've got a hurried schedule. You know, people. You know, I've been there. I understand how you can sometimes do some things that you might not otherwise do. That to just simply say it was unintentional. It was not intended to be a bow. You know, and let it go. But the idea of saying to the American people it was not a bow, don't expect it, don't believe what your eyes are telling you. This bespeaks an alarming lack of respect for the intelligence of the ordinary American on the part of the Obama White House press operation.
You know, and you came out with an interesting op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal talking about President Obama and his recent trip abroad, and talking about how, contrary to many people's expectations, in your view, President Obama has quickly become one of the most divisive presidents we've had in recent history. Now, coming from a guy who worked for George Bush, that's saying something. How do you get away with that?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. Actually, this was identified by the Pew Charitable Trust, the Pew Research Center, where they took a look back at all of they took a look at the approval ratings that President Obama and his predecessors had among their party members. And among Democrats, 88% of Democrats approve of the job performance of President Obama, but his job approval among Republicans has dropped to 27%. Now, it's called the approval gap. You take the support among people in your own party and subtract from it the support that you have among people in the other party. And if you look back, this is the biggest gap. 61 points is the biggest gap in the history of American politics. The next largest gap is 51 in 2001 under President George W. Bush. Now, President Bush had come through an awfully contentious election with a big court case in Florida and a narrow victory. He lost the popular vote. Democrats were not accepting him as a legitimate president, and yet his gap is smaller than the gap that in 11 weeks Barack Obama has been able to amass.
How do you explain that?
Well, there are two reasons. One is a friend of mine, a political science professor at the University of Missouri, John Petrosic, points out that this is a secular trend, that since 1980, this gap, this approval gap, where the partisans of your party approve and the partisans of the other party quickly begin to disapprove, that gap has been growing, that each successive president has had a higher approval gap than his predecessor. But the other thing is it has happened so quickly, I think, under this president, and to such an extreme degree, is because the conflict between what he said in the campaign he would do, get past the petty recriminations he said and the nasty partisanship, be a new kind of president with a new kind of politics. And instead what we have seen is that he has come into office and frozen the Republicans out of deliberations on Capitol Hill, and when they made suggestions about the stimulus bill, he pointedly reminded them, quote, I won. And then he goes to Europe and feels obligated to trash his predecessor while in a foreign country. Now, can you imagine Angela Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, getting up at an international conference and trashing her predecessor, Chancellor Schroeder, or Chirac being trashed by Sarkozy, or Gordon Brown standing up and trashing Tony Blair? The Europeans must have looked at him and thought, don't you understand the campaign is over and you're the winner? I thought it was gratuitous, unfair, unnecessary, and diminishing. It makes him look like he's not self-confident, like he's only able to advance himself by trashing his predecessor. And, of course, the Europeans, a lot of them think it's unfair because they have taken the measure of Bush and have worked with him over 8 years and know him and like him.
You know, I got to go, but I want to ask you this. The Washington Times and some others have come out and said President Obama had succeeded in that trip in becoming loved by Europeans and others abroad. As for whether he's respected, that remains an open question. Do you agree with that? Is that a fair question to raise?
I think that's, look, I don't know if it's love, but they certainly admire him and like him, and part of the reason is because he is not asking them to do the hard things. The Europeans don't like the American leadership to remind them that we must do tough things. I mean, he went over there with two purposes: get them to stimulate their economies by additional spending. They told them to get lost, and get additional combat capacity for Afghanistan, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. So he's not, and he talked to them in a way that doesn't hold their feet to the fire on the big important issues. Whether we like it or not, whether he likes it or not, America's president is the world's leader, and he must call the world to difficult and dangerous tasks.
Karl Rove, always a pleasure, sir. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
All the best.
Appreciate it.